Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on cybersecurity health checks. You'll all have noticed that you're on mute as you log in. That's to make sure that background noise doesn't interfere with everybody else who's on the webinar. It is, though, entirely easy for you to raise questions and address issues to me through the period of this webinar. You simply use the chat function, which is at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. As you look at it, you can type in a message and you can hit send, and I'll see what it is you want to ask about, or you can use the Q&A function. The Q&A function sits up there in the row of buttons along the top above the participants list. It's got a question mark sitting in the little blue icon. That's how you know it's for questions and answers. Use either of those. Ask questions as you want to, as the need to ask the question strikes you, and I'll pick them up and answer them as we go. Much more likely that I'll deal with all of the questions when we come to the end of the webinar, the bit of prepared conversation. For those of you who I know will ask the question, yes, a set of the slides will be going out in PDF format to everybody who's on the webinar. It will go out in an email rapidly after the end of the training course. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the introductory remarks. I'm Alan Calder. I'm your speaker for this afternoon session, which will be about 40 to 45 minutes. I'm the founder and executive chairman of IT Governance. I'm going to talk about cyber threat. Is it just hype? Where are the business risks? Some facts about the nature of the cybersecurity threat and what the point of addressing cyber risk might be. A brief look at the UK government's 10-step cyber governance plan, and then a look at what a cyber governance health check might be looking at and why, what type of benefits you can get out of having your cybersecurity and cybersecurity governance independently assessed. A quick look at how costs can be arrived at, how to get started, and where to find out more. For those of you who don't already know, not only am I the founder of IT Governance, but with Steve Watkins we wrote what's still the definitive guide to implementing an ISO 27001 information security management system, now in its 5th edition, the Open University postgraduate textbook on ISO 27001. Since that's now in its 5th edition, as I think I said, and since then we've worked with probably 150 different organizations to help them improve their information security management system, cyber controls. We've worked with many thousands of individuals through our training courses and workshops to help them address information security issues, and we've done that all around the world. So what we share with clients through webinars and more particularly in consultancy and training courses is informed by all that feedback and helping organizations address specific issues that they have. Starting point for today really is the statement that the Deputy Information Commissioner put out after fining Sony £250,000 for its recent compromise of millions of UK gamers' details. Mostly organizations, when they're looking at cybersecurity, say to themselves, I wonder how serious the threat is, I wonder what the harm to us will be. And while a number of aspects are not necessarily quantifiable, certainly the nature of the fine that you can get from the Information Security Commissioner is significant. And as the Deputy Commissioner said in this particular case, for an organization like Sony, if you're responsible for such a significant number of payment card details and login details, then keeping personal data secure has to be an organizational and therefore board priority. The Data Protection Act sets out some very clear requirements for organizations to take appropriate steps to protect personal data. And as the Information Commissioner says, Sony is certainly a business that ought to have known better. It ought to have taken appropriate steps to protect its its information, the information of all of its subscribers. Sony might, of course, think that a £250,000 fine is relatively small beer. Its overall costs in restitution, in remediation, and of course in reputation damage have been very significant. And there have been a number of those kinds of breaches, and what's even more likely is that there will be a number of more breaches. And the reason that's even more likely is captured, for instance, in the Mandiant Report. Some of you will have seen back in February, there's a US organization called Mandiant released a report which documented evidence going back over a number of years about cyber attacks that are carried out by the People's Liberation Army targeting organizations in the United States and other English-speaking countries. They've been able to trace those attacks to a very specific building in downtown Shanghai, which is, as it happens, also the base of the identified base of a PLA unit. And Mandiant say that it's quite likely that these attacks have been taking place since 2006. They're sophisticated, they're organized, they're not random. The volume of attacks increases from log-on time in the morning, drops a bit at lunchtime, stays up through the afternoon, and then at going home time drops right off. That's organized hacking. That's not a bunch of young people sitting in a downtown cellar. And what is the mark of success of an organization like Mandiant is what's called an advanced persistent threat. And cyber threats are not just about APTs, but you nevertheless need to be aware of them. They're advanced in that they are sophisticated technologically and in terms of the social engineering vectors and how the combination of those aspects is carried out. They're directed at business and political targets. They're not, the objective of these types of attacks is not necessarily destruction. It's much more usually the acquisition of valuable information, either about the organization or it's about its finances, information which can be valuable to competitors and to significant competitors sometimes. Might be competitors who are trying to derail a commercial M&A transaction, for instance, not just people who wish to illegally acquire the intellectual property of an organization. So they're advanced, they're sophisticated threats, they're persistent because they are maintained over time. The attacks aren't simply mounted one day, and if your defense is adequate, then they go away. They continue to mount the attacks until they find a gap in the defenses. Remember, they are sophisticated. They're going to find a gap sooner or later, usually some form of blended attack that will enable them to get through. Having said that, the vast number of successful APTs start off with exploitation of a known vulnerability, a vulnerability that could have been patched because it's already been identified by Microsoft or Unix or whoever it is, and the patches are available. They can be downloaded and they can be installed. So regular patching will normally deal with a significant number of basic attacks. The United Kingdom identified in its 2010 National Security Strategy, identified cyber attacks as one of the 4 highest priority risks faced by the UK as a country. And out of that came the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and that's not surprising. The government concluded that the UK economy was spending something like £27 billion a year on what cyber criminals took out of the country. That's the equivalent of one of Boris Johnson's Thames Estuary airports being built every 12 months, assuming that that stays or comes back onto the agenda. Pricewaterhouse did an information security breaches survey earlier on this year. 93% of large corporations and 76% of small businesses had a cybersecurity breach in 2012. And by had, what is usually meant is had somewhere between 90 and 150 successful breaches on average per organization. The estimated cost is between 110,000 and 250,000 for a large business, and between 15 and 30,000 pounds for a smaller organization. And it's interesting when you look at how most organizations approach cybersecurity spending. They say to themselves, if they're a small organization, why would I want to spend £10,000 to make sure that I've identified and patched vulnerabilities and I've got in place appropriate cybersecurity controls? Large organizations will turn their noses up at 30, 40, 50,000 pounds to arrive at the same level of certainty that would give them a sense that they're going to be able to avoid paying out this type of cost. And so the estimated cost between 110,000 and 250,000 for large business is in one breach in a year. And that's a significant cost to the organization. Zogby Analytics carried out a survey earlier on this year looking at the approach of investors, US investors, to cybersecurity. More than 70% of US investors, their survey found, were interested in reviewing the cybersecurity practices of listed public companies, and 80% of those expressed the view that they were likely not to consider investing in a company that had a history of cyber attacks. Respondents indicated they were twice as worried about a company that had a breach of customer data than one which simply had a theft of intellectual property. And the reason for that is, of course, that a breach of customer data isn't just a loss of valuable information. It will usually bring regulatory action. In the United States, might well bring a class action suit from all of the individuals whose data has been compromised. And usually, therefore, restitution will involve some form of personal monitoring of individual records and data records to ensure that if there has been any particular breach, identity theft or similar, it can be picked up and dealt with fairly quickly. So being aware of the impact of negative PR is just as important when looking at cybersecurity as is the issue of looking at the cost of remediation and repair after a successful breach. In IT governance, we did a survey of a boardroom survey asking about cybersecurity, the results of which we published about a month or so ago. More than half of the respondents said that they saw the greatest threat to data and computer systems as coming from their own employees, and a quarter of organizations said that they definitely received been on the receiving end of a concerted cyber attack in the past 12 months. However, given that 20% of the people who responded, and this was a C-suite survey, were unsure if their organization has been subject to attack in the first place, it's likely that the number that have actually been attacked is much higher. Remember, one of the points about advanced persistent threats is that they are highly sophisticated. They're almost certainly already installed on your network, particularly if you're a larger organization, and they're very quietly and surreptitiously sending out useful information. Anyway, you can be sure that there isn't an APT in the form of a carefully designed Trojan sitting on your network, is by carrying out a very specific internal test to ensure that that there are none on the network. The majority of respondents say their board receives regular reports on the status of IT security. The truth is that in at least 52% of the cases, those reports are only submitted annually. And if you think about the fact that most boards will deal with a review of their overall risk posture on at least a quarterly basis, looking at information or cybersecurity annually is not particularly sensible. The speed with which cyber threats evolve, the need for evolving our capability to respond and deal with them is something which is very time sensitive. And so if you're a chair or a non-executive director or executive director, you should want to make sure that you are on top of cybersecurity threats on at least a more regular basis than once a year. Only 30% of the respondents to the Board Watch survey said that they thought that understanding of current IT security threats was a prerequisite for board-level candidates. and a significant minority of respondents said their company was making the wrong level of investment for information security or unsure if their investment was appropriate. So we've got on the one hand an escalating number of cybersecurity incidents. According to the National Audit Office, some 44 million cybersecurity incidents in the United Kingdom in 2012, and a significant minority of the companies we surveyed saying that that company was making the wrong level of investment in information security or an inappropriate level of investment. So if you're not sure how many systems you've got that might be vulnerable to cyber attack, how do you know if you've already been hacked? And the real issue is whether you've been hacked or not depends on who got to the vulnerable system first. Was it your information security team, or was it a hacker's automated vulnerability sniffing and attack security products? Another reason for looking at cybersecurity risk is, of course, that a growing number of organizations recognize that their suppliers may not be perfectly secure. 74% of respondents said their customers prefer dealing with suppliers who have proven cybersecurity credentials, while 50% said their company has been asked about information security measures in the past 12 months. And, you know, with cybersecurity and information security management now a staple part of RFPs and RFQs, simply being able to say, yes, we have an ISO 27001 certificate is a big step towards being on the shortlist or being considered for a tender. Alongside that is the fact that ISO 27001 is an effective method of demonstrating compliance with a number of information-related laws and regulations in the United Kingdom, around Europe, and across the world. So while 87% of organizations know about ISO 27001, and the reason I'm talking about ISO 27001, as you'll see in a minute, is that it remains the backbone of information security management in the cybersecurity arena. It's striking that only 35% of responding organizations are actually compliant with ISO 27001. Back at the end of July, the heads of MI5 and GCHQ wrote to the chairs of all FTSE 350 companies and said that they thought it was an important thing for all such companies to carry out a cyber security governance health check, and said that it would be better for chairs to personally do the assessment questionnaire themselves, because they should be making it their duty to ensure that their cyber security house was in order. That information from those cybersecurity health checks is, for those organizations that do it, will be gathered together by GCHQ and MI5 and used to put together a state of the nation in terms of where organizations are in terms of cybersecurity risk assessments. And while you can get a copy of our Boardroom Cyberwatch survey, it's interesting, we'd say essentially for board members, it's really useful to have a good sense of what's involved in a risk assessment, and a good idea to understand that before you join the large number of organizations who have been breached. A recent UK government survey said that many businesses can lose up to 6% of their turnover in a cyber attack. That's going to be a higher percentage in smaller organizations than large organizations, but the combination of remediation, reputation damage, loss of business, and loss of reputation can have a very significant impact on the health of the organization. So the cyber governance health check is a practical assessment of how your cybersecurity posture relates to what is now recognized good practice. If you're having a cybersecurity health check, you want not just to know where the gaps are, but you want to have something which prioritizes your approach. Which areas of risk should you be addressing first? And cybersecurity is a combination of people who know what they're doing, processes that are effective, and technical controls that work. You can't have one without the other. You need all three of them operating independently. And so when you have a breakdown, you have only technical controls, you don't have the process and people controls. Any one of those can lead to that mix of costs, fines, loss of customers, damage to reputation, loss of profits, and investment as people, as potential investors and share buyers move away. So the purpose of a cybersecurity risk assessment is to try and establish how effective your IT cybersecurity governance structure is, and it needs to, in order to do that, start off by understanding what your risk appetite is. Different organizations have a different appetite for risk, and there's nothing in any current guidance or best practice which would say that outside of the public sector you have to put in place a minimum level of security other than that which is mandated by legal, regulatory or contractual requirements. What you have to put in place is something which is appropriate for your appetite for risk, and therefore you need to have a board authorized and approved assessment framework which includes clarity about risk appetite. So as part of the cyber governance health check, we'll look at your documentation and talk to board, chair, managers to determine to what extent you have in place an effective risk governance structure which has clear identification of your risk appetites and selection and implementation of controls in relation to that, appropriate information risk policies, and of course adequate cyber insurance. 12% of the worst security breaches last year were partly caused or mostly caused by senior management giving insufficient priority to security. We'd certainly, in doing this exercise, want to talk to senior managers. And 26% of boards hadn't briefed their board on security risks in the last year, 19% never having ever done so. The next step would be to look at home and mobile networking policies. Are they adequate? Do your staff adhere to them? And mobile and home working is a core part of ISO 27001 compliance. We draw on that knowledge of effective ISO 27001 controls to identify whether or not your staff have been trained to follow your policies, assuming that you have in place appropriate home and mobile working policies and procedures. Do you have a secure baseline build in place? What evidence do you have of this? What evidence would you be able to provide of this? How do you protect data at transit and in rest? 33% of small organizations have taken no steps at all to mitigate the risks associated with staff using smartphones and tablets. 8% of large organizations have taken some steps. A very small percentage of organizations have taken all appropriate steps to deal with data on mobile media, on laptops, and in transit, which includes in email. Third part of the cyber health test is to look at user education and awareness programs. And social engineering, the attacker's preferred route of attack when you've got reasonably good technical controls in place is to take advantage of people's gullibility or their desire to be liked or to be helpful, to trick them into giving out information which they shouldn't provide. So we'd look at whether your user education and awareness program is adequate. How do you make sure that you train staff on what your information security policies and procedures are? How do they know what they should be doing around specific information assets? Do they know how to deal with cyber risks? Do they recognize a phishing email when it comes in? Do they download the attachment which has been sent by your bank from your bank manager containing information about some money which has been transferred into your account, but they just can't trace the supplier of it? How do you train staff to recognize those types of things as potential risks? The reality is that 54% of organizations see their own staff and contractors as a greater threat to data security and computer systems than outside attack. And 42% of large organizations, nevertheless, don't provide any ongoing security awareness training to their staff. It's kind of, this is our biggest threat area. We need to train people, but we don't. 10% don't even brief staff on information security issues on induction. Briefing staff includes things like, what are our password policies? How does username get allocated? Those are all basic parts of the information security management system. The next step is how user privileges, which control access, which control rights like ability to read, edit, delete data, are those properly managed? Do people have the privileges which are necessary for specific aspects of their roles? How do we control access and monitor user activity? And we'll look at, therefore, things like account management processes, password policy, privileged accounts. We'll look at how you control access to activity and audit logs, for instance. People have been known to mount an attack and to make sure their attack includes visiting the access logs and altering them or scrambling them to delete the there's a good question I shall answer about how do you deal with the Michael Snowden. 36% of the worst security breaches in the year were caused by inadvertent human error. Inadvertent human error, not just through deliberate attack by an insider. And a significant reason why in our BoardWatch cybersecurity survey, respondents were identifying the human component as a danger was because of error as much as because of deliberate misuse of systems by staff. What is your policy in step 5? What is your policy for controlling mobile and removable devices? So a cyber governance health check will want to make sure that you have a policy which deals with how mobile and removable computer media are managed. How do you ensure that any removable media are encrypted if there's any possibility of them carrying confidential data or personal data? How do you make sure that removable media are scanned for malware before they're connected to your systems? 50% of large organizations do have a mobile device management policy. You would have thought by now it would be a higher percentage, but there we are, 50% of large organizations. And only 23% of large organizations train staff on the threats associated with mobile devices. And remember, threats associated with mobile devices include the threat to the organization of a corporate BlackBerry or Apple device being stolen, not password protected, gives somebody access to the whole corporate network, gives somebody access to information in your email box, in your calendar, all of which could be very useful to a competitor or to an attacker looking for information to enable them to create a cunning, smart social engineering attack on the organization. So cybersecurity health tests will look at exactly what you do about those aspects. We'll also explore what your monitoring strategy for ICT systems and networks is. And this is the steps we go through are exactly the steps that the UK Department for Business for Business recommends as being the key components of a cybersecurity governance system would be. How do you monitor activity on ICT systems and networks? How do you look for rogue wireless access points, making sure that somebody hasn't plugged in to the computer network a wireless access point which enables them to be able to use the network to log on to other aspects, other areas on the internet. And monitoring is important because 85% of reported breaches took weeks to discover. A high percentage of those, something like 90% of those breaches, were discovered by outsiders, not by insiders. Can't think of anything more embarrassing than having a client tell you that there's been a breach, and they know that because they've been sold some information that came from clearly inside your network, or they visited a website and found that it's been taken down or corrupted. 20% of large organizations, 20% of organizations of all sizes were unsure whether or not they've been attacked. And if you're unsure whether or not you've been attacked, the almost racing certainty is that you have been. There is malware loose on your network. It will be either exporting information that you should rather keep private, or depending on the organization, could be using your network as part of a zombie botnet. A significant component of zombie botnets which are deployed by attackers in, for instance, denial of service attacks, are corporate networks or bits of corporate network which they've been able to take control of remotely. Step 7 is to look at technical vulnerabilities. Given that most attackers succeed either through a social engineering route or through exploiting known vulnerabilities, we'll look very carefully at technical vulnerability patching, whether ICT devices are securely configured, which means are they locked down to the manufacturer's recommended security settings? Do you know what devices are authorized to be on the network? Do you have an inventory of authorized devices? Do you have a defined baseline build for all devices, workstations, servers, etc.? 79% of hacked organizations were victims of opportunistic attacks. That means there was a vulnerability which a hacker was able to take advantage of. And let's remember, the hacker isn't sitting there looking for vulnerabilities. The hacker is finding vulnerabilities because they have software programs which are searching for known vulnerabilities, which when they find, they will attack. And 96% of attacks were not highly difficult. And that's one of the most challenging statistics for most organizations. Most organizations, if you ask them, will say that they think they're pretty secure, but if 96% of attacks were not highly difficult, then the vast number of organizations are not going to be that secure. Step 8 is the anti-malware policy and practices. Do you have a good anti-malware policy? Are you deploying an anti-malware software solution which is updated on a several times a day basis? Has it been tested in a sand bed against known malware? What number of known malware components does it pick up? You know, the reality is that just because the anti-malware software has on a known brand name doesn't mean it's necessarily the best product available. Going with the crowd where anti-malware software is concerned is kind of like going with the crowd where being attacked by cyber criminals is concerned. So we'll have a look at what you've chosen, what processes you have in place. The logic is we're trying to help organizations make sure that they're unlike the 41% of small businesses and 7% of large businesses whose data breach in the last 12 months was as a result of an infection by viruses or some other form of malware. 28% of all organizations identified the fact that malware had had a very serious disruptive impact on the organization. You might think, in other words, that dealing with malware is now a very straightforward aspect of cybersecurity. It clearly is not. It's clearly still a critical component of surviving effectively. Firewalls and penetration testing is a key part of making sure that you're safe against internal and external attack. So we'd be looking at whether your firewalls are well configured or not. Remember me talking about the mix between people, process, and technology. A firewall is a classic example of a piece of technology that needs to be managed by somebody who has appropriate skills and training against a set of predetermined risk acceptance criteria and configuration requirements. And so we'd be looking at what you do to operate firewalls effectively on the network perimeter, how you monitor and test security controls, how you make sure that vulnerabilities have been identified both in web applications as well as external network, as well as internally in terms of devices sitting on the network. 98% of breaches in the last 12 months involved external agents. 81% of breaches involved hacking. When we say 98% involved external agents, what I mean is there's a combination often of internal and external. It's not just external, but external agents able to get into your network one way or another is kind of what you expect to find in just about every single attack. 81% of the breaches involve hacking. And then finally, because a basic premise of cybersecurity is that you're going to be hacked, there's going to be a breach. The final question is, what do you have in place that enables you to respond effectively to incidents? Have you tested it? And there is an escalation from cybersecurity incident response through to business continuity, and there should be a seamless transition from them. There should be a seamless transition from, if you have a service desk, for instance, from the identification of security incidents on the service desk to tested response plans to dealing with unexpected attacks. Do you know how to deal with the investigation part of a cybersecurity attack? What do you do in terms of digital forensics? And very few organizations will want to have their own digital forensics capability, but every organization should know what to do in the case of an attack. So in just the same way as every organization has a trained first aider who can deal with the initial aspects of a first aid problem while awaiting the arrival of more experienced, better trained first aid personnel, all organizations need somebody who knows what to do with collecting core evidence of intrusion, making sure that you're going to be able to, once you've remediated, you're going to be able to work out what happened and why. If there's a criminal prosecution that comes out of it, you might want to be following through on that. But digital forensics first responder is a key part of what most organizations do. Remember, 92% of incidents were discovered by third parties, not by the organization itself. 76% of small organizations and 91% of large organizations had a malicious security incident last year. In other words, having an incident response procedure in place is another one of the basic things that any organization should do. You shouldn't be saying to yourself, it won't happen to me, and if it does, our firewall will save us, because the reality is that 91% of large organizations found that it didn't. So we have a cybersecurity health test. It's carried out while one's chairman is capable of asking usually good penetrating questions. Your chairman also usually doesn't have a deep knowledge of information security risk. So an independent information security governance health check is a practical way to work out, A, whether you're going to be able to answer what the government has to say intelligently, and B, put you in, and I think much more important in a way, put you in a position to give clients the assurance they're looking for that actually you are on top of information security risk right now. When looking at information security risk, there are a number of standards that might be appropriate. We find organizations saying that the proliferation of standards gets to be confusing. We accept that it is. However, each of the standards has different areas of focus, and that if you can put them all together, you get something which is significantly better than following one standard on its own. So the UK Department for Business 10 Steps, which I've just been talking through, is a very practical assessment process for identifying strengths and weaknesses in the cybersecurity structure of the organization. PAS, it's a publicly available standard, PAS 555, published by the UK's BSI, is a very specific cybersecurity governance framework. It looks at the types of outcomes that a good cybersecurity governance and risk management approach should want to achieve, and it's designed in such a way that other standards which look at the how something is done can fit usefully inside the PAS 555 umbrella. So if you think of PAS 555 as specifying outcomes that you want from effective cybersecurity, and you look to other standards like ISO 27001 as providing best practice for what you should be doing, you're getting into the right area. ISO 27001 is the internationally recognized best practice standard for managing information security, recognized the world over. It's got a set of 133 controls which look at a wide range of information security risks in the context of the organization's appetite for risk. Alongside it, ISO 22301 looks at good practice around business continuity management. It's again an international standard. It follows the same type of structure as ISO 27001, and being able to put them together in a way that recognizes that there is an escalation point from ISO 27001 to ISO 22301 is a sensible part of addressing cybersecurity within a PAS 555 environment. So a good question at this point, I guess, really is the average global cost of a data breach in 2012 was $136, about £90 at that time's exchange rate per record. $136 per record. That's taking into account costs of restitution, damage to reputation, costs of remediation, costs of everything associated with the breach. $136 per record, with an average breach being anywhere between 10,000 and a million plus records. It's relatively easy to work out how big a breach could be. And remember, cybersecurity criminals, cyber criminals, see data about individuals, personal data, payment card data, as one of the most useful sets of data they can lay their hands on. If they can get hold of usernames and passwords, it almost certainly gives them an opportunity to find their way into accounts. If they can get hold of payment card data, they can pass fraudulent transactions. And a very high number, probably 2/3 of all cybersecurity attacks, are carried out successfully against small organizations, not just big ones, as my statistics showed earlier on. So the question is, what's the sensible amount for an organization to spend on securing itself against that kind of level of cyber risk? Well, one way of finding out is to have a cybersecurity risk assessment. And for an IT governance risk assessment, that involves really two stages. The first is an initial on-site visit, in which we try and scope out a much more comprehensive audit. At the end of an initial visit, we'll be able to give you an overview of where your major risks are, an overview of where your major exposures are, and a prioritized high-level target list of areas to focus on. We'll also be able to tell you what it will take to carry out a proper, detailed audit of your cybersecurity risk management program, looking at all of the items that are in the BIS framework, but fleshed out by ISO 27001, PAS 55, and so on. And that enables us, once we've done an assessment like that, to give you actionable remediation advice prioritized for where your most significant areas of risk are. Very easy to find out more. Call us, email us. We can connect you to our cybersecurity risk assessment experts and talk through how we can specifically help you address cybersecurity risk. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to come and talk to us, we have a cybersecurity managing and mitigating risk workshop taking place on the 24th of September in Cambridge at the Hauser Forum. It's a whole day workshop. The morning is given over to a number of talkers talking through cybersecurity risk, independent third parties talking through cybersecurity risk and mitigation approaches from a number of points of view. And then there's an availability in the afternoon for you to have a private consultation with a cybersecurity risk assessment expert if that's what you want to do. You can read more when you go to the events and exhibitions section of our website. There's a minor price to pay to attend, which basically just covers the costs of the event. But it's Tuesday the 24th of September. Some organizations will want to get started on dealing with cybersecurity risk assessment right away, don't want to use consultants. This is IT governance. We prefer to help, we're able to help people address things any way they want to. So we have published in the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks a comprehensive cybersecurity risk management suite of tools, which includes a set of best practice document templates that you can deploy very quickly. It includes PAS 555, the cybersecurity standard. It includes a copy of the ISO additional guidance around cybersecurity controls, ISO 27032, all of which is consolidated into the linked documentation toolkit there's a risk assessment tool added in. So for just £2,300, there is a complete cybersecurity risk assessment toolkit suite, and that financial saving is available just through to the end of August. And that brings me to an end of what I've been planning to say. There are a number of questions that have come in. I'll start answering those shortly. If you want to ask questions or raise issues, the best way to do it is either through the Q&A function or through the chat function. And what I'll do is I'll take the questions in order that they've come in, and I'll read the question out. So if you just type in your question through either one of those routes, I'll read the question out and then give you the answer to it. A number of people have asked the same question, so I'll just answer that one first. Will the presentation be available later? Yes, the presentation will be going out to all of the attendees on the webinar. There'll be an email going out with a download link in it. It'll be going out in probably about half an hour's time. Do make sure that it can get through your firewall and perimeter defenses. Even though it has a link inside it, it will be from us. You can download it. So first of the questions, do we believe anti-malware should be implemented on all platforms? In other words, Linux, Apple's, can we get some pushback on non-Windows devices? Yes, we've been seeing organizations getting pushback on non-Windows devices for some years. The reality is that hackers are business people like anybody else. What they look for is low-hanging fruit, and for a long time the low-hanging fruit has been Windows devices, because it's been the software which is most widely deployed. However, we've seen as iOS and other software systems have become more widely deployed that the vulnerabilities which exist in those packages and those software systems are also being exploited. When only as maybe 2 or 3% of organizations had deployed Linux, you didn't get many hackers interested in exploiting Linux vulnerabilities. You do now. And the difference isn't between whether Windows has vulnerabilities and Linux, Unix, iOS, and so on don't. They do. Every piece of software has in it a number of vulnerabilities. The difference is whether hackers find it worthwhile exploiting. And I would say that if you have valuable information on a device, whatever its operating system, and it is possible to patch those, then as a matter of course you should be patching them. We would be, in doing a cybersecurity risk assessment, we would be looking at all operating systems to identify where there might be vulnerabilities that an attacker could take advantage of. So let me just scroll back here. How do you identify an Edward Snowden who is a trusted employee at the outset? What is the preparation for that? Well, I think from what I've seen that the information about what Edward Snowden was able to access suggests that he was able to access a very wide range of data, and that the screening that might have been carried out was perhaps not necessarily adequate for the information he was able to access. It's also clear that he was able to access a lot of information that perhaps he shouldn't have been able to access. He didn't need to as part of his role, which is why he was able to collect something as widely damaging as it was. Having said all of that, the core of the approach is that you have to do a detailed risk assessment. You have to ask yourself, what are the types of things that, in relation to valuable assets, could happen? What would be the impacts if it were to happen? One of the things you should be asking yourself, as the Edward Snowden and several other Bradley Manning cases all indicate, is that when you give somebody access to a lot of information, they're technically capable, they're unsupervised for long periods of time, they might do something you don't want them to do. A good risk assessment should therefore tell you that you need to put in place additional controls, which might include monitoring what information is being collected, what information is being downloaded, what devices are being plugged into the network. All of those are things that you should maybe be doing as a consequence of a risk assessment, and which quite clearly was not being done in either of those two cases. is layered anti-malware and antivirus protection effective? Most anti-malware companies will tell you that it isn't. You should just deploy their own. Practical experience has taught that there are some anti-malware products that will pick up malware that other anti-malware products won't, and that running 2 or 3 anti-malware products alongside one another can lead to better anti-malware protection. It can also lead to network congestion. It can lead to information access being slowed down. And so it can be more sensible to focus on how you go about obtaining an anti-malware product that genuinely identifies and deals with the range of malware to which you're exposed. And that's probably a better thing to be doing than be looking at layering anti-malware and antivirus protection. Number more questions, the same one. Yes, you can get a copy of the presentation. It'll go out automatically in an email to everybody who's been on this webinar in probably about half an hour's time. That kind of looks like the questions are beginning to dry up. If you still have a question, please, the Q&A function or the chat function, you can put a question in there, and I'll read it out to everybody, and then share it with everybody, share the answer with everybody. In the absence of any more questions, then, ladies and gentlemen, how BYOD could impact cybersecurity is a very good question I hope somebody would ask. Yes, BYOD, bring your own device, can have a tremendous impact on cybersecurity. So when we're talking about auditing your mobile device policy, one of the things we look at is BYOD. And in many organizations, even if you don't have a BYOD policy, you've almost certainly got people accessing their email with their own device policy. So because you've got Microsoft Web Access, or sorry, Outlook Web Access or similar services available, it probably means that people are logging on using their mobile phone, which means that if they have insecure personal password practices, the possibilities are that some third person, some third party might also be able to log on in exactly the same way. It means that they can export information by email, download it on their home computer, shift it out to some third party. And just in parenthesis, when we talk about the security of email, it's worthwhile noting that Google, in a regulatory filing, said that users of Gmail have got no reasonable grounds for believing that their email is or should be secure. Just like to draw your attention to what Google says. If you use Gmail, you have no reasonable grounds for believing the contents of your email should be secure. Any suggestions as to where I could find a good cyber threat repositories that you can use in an assessment? The answer is that VS Risk, which is the tool produced by Vigilant Software, which I referred to earlier on, has got a good selection of threats and vulnerabilities that lead you to identify risks. I believe that that range is being expanded to include the ISO 27032 and the Cloud Control Matrix risks, which are all part of an expanded range of issues that you might want to deal with in terms of cybersecurity risk assessment. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that pretty well brings us to the end of this presentation. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I hope it's been useful. As I say, a copy of the presentation will be going out. If you decide that you would find an independent assessment of your cybersecurity posture useful, please do email me or call us IT Governance on our do log on to our website or give us a call, 0845 070 1750, and we can arrange to do an initial risk assessment for you, work through all of these areas and identify those areas in which it's worth your while taking steps to prioritize closing down on cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Thank you all for being here today. I hope it's been useful, and I look forward to you joining us on another IT governance webinar in due course. Bye-bye.